afternoon, everyone. Assuming it's the afternoon for most of you joining us. Welcome to today's event, From Stabilisation to Navigation, Rethinking Peacebuilding in the Sahel. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Véronique Dudoué. I'm a senior advisor at the Burger Foundation, and I have the immense pleasure to act as moderator for the next 60 minutes together. Today's event is available in English and French, and you can select your preferred language by clicking on the globe or interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen. If you have any technical difficulties during the event, you can let us know by using the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom window. Pour dire en français aussi, l'événement d'aujourd'hui est disponible en anglais et en français. Vous pouvez sélectionner la langue de votre choix en cliquant sur l'icône
French and English. You
un
can
globe
select
terrestre
the language
en bas
of
de
your
votre écran.
choice.
Si vous avez des difficultés techniques
Just
pendant
at
l'événement,
the
veuillez nous
bottom
en
of
faire part
your
avec la
screen, if
fonction
you have
Q&A.
technical problems, you can
can also
just
use the Q&A function
send
to
us a
ask
message.
questions throughout.
You can ask questions
Before we
through
begin, I
the
would
small
like to
window.
acknowledge the ongoing violence and suffering in the Middle East and elsewhere. Many communities are living through the devastating realities of conflict, and discussions such as today's on how peace building in practice on the ground and how external actors can offer support responsibly reminds us of the urgency and the importance of this work. The discussion today is inspired by a new report by our research associate, Dr. Hantje Erberg, called Cultural Blind Spots in the Sahel, and the related blog article, which she and I recently published on our website, which calls for a shift in how we think about peace building in the region. For many years, international engagement in the Sahel has been framed through the lens of stabilisation. The idea has often been that external actors could help to restore order by strengthening state institutions, by supporting security forces, or by implementing programs which are designed elsewhere. Yet, despite enormous investments, the region continues to face deep insecurity, political upheaval, and profound social tensions. This raises an important question: what might we be missing? One of the key arguments emerging from Antje's research, but also from many voices in the region, is that international actors often overlook the ways in which people in the Sahel already manage conflict, negotiate authority, and maintain social relations in contexts of chronic uncertainty. These practices do not always fit with the institutional models or the policy frameworks that guide international interventions. We therefore suggest moving from a mindset of stabilisation to one of navigation, recognizing that communities continuously adapt, negotiate, and manage conflict through locally rooted peace practices and insider mediation systems. Today's conversation invites us to reflect critically on both peace practice and peace research in the Sahel. What are the cultural and the analytical blind spots that shape external engagement? What do peace-building architectures actually look like on the ground? And how might international actors, be they researchers, policymakers, or practitioners, better recognize and better support the knowledge and the initiatives that already exist? To answer those questions, I'm delighted to be joined by four outstanding speakers who bring complementary perspectives from research and practice. So we will have for this conversation Dr. Hantje Erberg, who, among her many other roles and functions, is indeed associate researcher at the Burger Foundation. We will have also with us Burema Adamu Noma, who is head of division at the High Authority for Peace Consolidation, Autorité à la Consolidation de la Paix in Niger. We will also have Dr. Ivanki Shawa, who is senior researcher at the Bonn International Center for Conflict Studies. And last but not least, we will have Fatima Alansa, who is director of the Tilwate Peace Network in Mali. I will invite them to answer a question each in a first round, and then we will have a second round of briefer interventions, and after this we will take questions from the floor. I will not read out their long bios to save time, so you can read them as well in the chat. There's one question, I think, about the French interpreter adjusting his microphone, so I hope he can hear this and find the right sound for people to be able to follow. So I'm going to start with Antje. So Antje, your recent report is the starting point for today's conversation. Drawing on your research and your experience in Niger, could you share with us what you see as maybe the 2 or 3 most important lessons, about local mediation and about the cultural blind spots that often shape external engagement in the Sahel?
Yes, thank you so much, Veronique, and welcome to everybody. It's great that we get an opportunity to discuss in this space the Sahel and engagements with the Sahel. Maybe just as a precursor, I just wanted to say that when I first worked in the Sahel region before, or in Niger, I approached the region through mainly the lens of international intervention, through institutional frameworks, security analysis, and kind of predefined categories of actors that we have. And because I was part of a system that tried to make sense of complexity through structure. And over time, this didn't really add up. And it became clearer to me even after the withdrawal of the mission, my OICAP mission in Niger. When I returned then independently, I began and had the chance to really see the Sahel in a different way, as a deeply layered political and social landscape that is governed by a logic that is not that easily captured by our standard models. And it is from that shift that the whole idea of the blind spots emerged, and I had the chance to write this report. And I wrote this report initially also in French, in a maybe language that's not as usual for policy briefs, for Berkhoff or any other organization, because it is written in a more fluid way. But this is also to render homage at the sort of social and cultural environment I was engaging in. So maybe just 2 lessons, because we don't have much time, and I hope people will read the report, is that the first one is how we fundamentally misread how power and legitimacy actually work. So we tend to analyze conflicts through clearly separated political spheres like state, civil society, non-state actors, as if authority was really organized in a very hierarchical way. But I think this assumption doesn't hold in the Sahel and probably other regions. And what we encounter instead is here something quite different, and that's what one can call a heterarchical system of power. This is where authority is distributed in overlapping centers between traditional leaders, religious authorities, armed actors, state representatives, and community networks, and all interacting in a very dynamic and context-specific way. So this is not just fragmentation, but it is a different form of political order. And the point about the blind spots really was that if we fail to recognize this, we are not just missing a detail, but we are fundamentally really misreading how power operates. And this also applies of how we think about civil society and legitimacy. Civil society in the Sahel, I would argue, and this is really important for engagement, is not neutral or external, but it is embedded in political and social networks. And this legitimacy is also not derived from formal institution, but from social embeddedness, from historical authority, and the ability to provide protection and justice. So this is the first lesson. It's quite simple. It's that we misread power. If we misread power and legitimacy, we misread the conflict in itself. And the second, maybe bigger sort of lesson that I would, or message that I would wanted to really get across is that engagement remains, of course, necessary, but the way of how we engage must change. If our analysis is flawed, then our engagement is also flawed. That sounds very simple, but it has quite important consequences. And the answer is not disengagement. The Sahel, as we all know, really matters not only for the region in itself, but for Europe. And the security dynamics, migration, and geopolitical shifts are all interconnected, and they haven't just gone away. So stepping back, as we have done because of political reason, is probably not realistic, nor is it responsible. But the engagement must become more humble, more political, and more context sensitive. And it must move, in that sense, what I said in the first lesson, beyond simplified models of that one state and one dialogue that is should be held. But it must also question assumptions about neutrality and legitimacy, and it must recognize these overlapping sources of legitimacy and sources of them. Otherwise, we risk designing interventions that do not match the realities on the ground. And perhaps maybe one last sentence to summarize both lessons is that what we often interpret as fragmentation is, in fact, a hierarchical order we have not yet learned to read, but through an interdisciplinary approach that takes the respect and time to engage with actors, with multiple actors and organizations in institutions on the ground, we could maybe become better supporters of conflict engagement and resolution in the Sahel. Over to you, Veronique.
Thank you so much, Antje, for setting the scene for us and trying to give a sense of the complexity, layered nature of authority, conflicts, but also interventions and what it means in 5 minutes. I know it's an ordeal, but thanks for trying. I'm going to turn to Borema, hoping that the interpreter, as mic has been solved. I heard there were some problems to understand the interpreter. So again, Borema is going to speak in French, and the audience can decide with the globe whether they want to listen in French or in English. So Borema, your bio is going to be available in the web, in the chat, so I don't have to read it. I'm going to ask you, from your perspective at the Haute Autorité de la Consolidation de la Paix, you are working directly
as the authority of peace consolidation, you are working.
Could you help us to understand how those mechanisms function in practice and how communities manage conflict on the ground? And maybe where do external interventions tend to misunderstand or bypass or even sometimes weaken those existing architectures? Thank you so much.
Merci beaucoup, docteur, et merci
Thank you very much, Doctor. Thank you for the job that has been done for Dr. Ange. I think in case of Niger, we can, without actually any doubt, that the consolidation of peace is not only on formal institutions. This is built on certain architecture which combine state institutions and as the report is said, I've actually read the report. When it comes to institutions, the hot authority of the peace consolidation, in which I work for almost 10 years now, this, plays a very crucial role in terms of mediation and conflict prevention and dialogue, and that has been doing so for 30 years now. Let's say between communities or local authorities and the states, that architecture can be understood only if we implicate some mechanism which are social and local. Yes, of course, in some areas, in rural area most particularly, the conditions that everything is done by local leaders, religious leaders, women in mediation, the rural code. These are people who are very, they love their rural radio stations. So these people are alone in their work. Most of the time, they're the only ones when a conflict erupts, they're the ones who intervene. They try to mediate between pastorist communities and the community, the local communities. So they tell themselves in those areas that mechanism allows to observe when there is social illegitimate actions are done. And now they try to put on a model that can work for both. Needed actually some external intervention, as Dr. Anna has said. So we need those structures, international structures, to actually show some difficulties, which is among the lack of knowledge in terms of local mechanism. We've actually observed that some approach or international approaches, they want a strict structure, which are very structured, legitimate structures, and they neglect local structures. You will see that we have insufficient local dynamics and cultural. So society in the Sahel, is what I know, they actually build on complex equilibrium between generation, authorities, local authorities. So if we don't actually try to work on those structures, they can create a very big problem. You know, we have to think about the local authorities key. Here we can talk about women in mediation. Those people can work in prevention, even in management of conflicts. And fourthly, we have to have a technocratic approach of peace to apply some standard which are very we know every society has its dynamics. At times we have a short-lived vision, and yet the consolidation of peace is a long process, which has to build hope and trust among the belligerents. At times, we actually weaken social actors when we create parallel structures which are there to modify local equilibrium. I think with our experience that we have of peace building, that everything that we've spoken about has shown the importance to understand the structure, local structure of peace, so that we can come up with our intervention. Thank you, Doctor, for the given time.
Thank you so much for bringing this very important practitioner's perspective. I'm going to turn, maybe before turning to Yvan, one message in French pour les auditeurs qui nous écoutent en français.
For those who are listening to us in French, I've actually put some information in the chat for you to not get English and French at the same time. You have to click on interpretation so that you can hear clearly.
So Yvan, your research has long examined conflict dynamics and international responses in the Sahel. You also published recently an article called The Demise of Conflict Studies, where you and your co-author argue that the very field of conflict research is facing a crisis of relevance, in part because it was built on assumptions tied to Western interventionist paradigms and is struggling to respond to current dynamics. So based on this, but also listening to what you have heard so far, how does this discussion resonate with your own work? And what does it tell us about the assumptions that often underpin Western conflict research or Western approaches to stabilization?
Thank you very much for your invitation to this event. And thank you very much to Antje also for sharing this piece of very stimulating intellectual work. It's a piece that resonates with multiple aspects of the work that I've been conducting so far, and also the work that a lot of Sahel analysts have been conducting so far, in the sense that it's essentially an invitation, or at least that's the way I read it, to reflect with more humility of dynamics going on in the field, in the Sahel in particular. So the epistemological aspect of the work, I find it quite fascinating in the sense that it's suggesting that anyone coming from the outside, visiting the Sahel, planning to do work there on the peace building front, should somehow revise their own assumptions, stereotype, and take the time to listen to multiple voices. So the epistemological angle is indeed extremely important. Also, the way power is being represented, the fluidity between a diversity of actors, each having some limited legitimacy. This is also an essential aspect of the work that Antje has shared with us. And for all these aspects, I'm super grateful. The part which I think I feel perhaps more frustrated about has to do with power relationships. And I think that the report does a great job at explaining how different voices and actors can contribute to peace, but maybe overlooks a bit like some hard power that is at work in the region right now. And clearly, for many years, hard power was represented by the foreign intervention, but it's not the only source of hard power. International NGOs might be part of this stabilization complex also, that sometimes contribute to silence voices at the local level. The post-colonial states, I think, also very much contributed to disrupt existing dynamics between communities, for example, and somehow undermined their abilities to dialogue with each other. And current military regimes might also very much contribute to disrupt existing initiatives or superimpose on existing initiatives some top-down forces. So that's the part I'm the most concerned with right now. Some actors have the ability to silence the local voices whose capacity to address conflicts, as Antie's work shows, is immense. And Antie actually suggests in the paper that many of the people she has interviewed as part of the work show some frustration, right, with the ongoing state of affairs. Young people feel that not listened to enough, women, similarly, traditional leaders as well. So there's something going on that is coming from above. So we cannot completely ignore this top-down dimension. And why? Because they are the parameters of the conversation. So my big question, which I haven't solved yet, to be honest, is what do we do in this situation where the top-down forces remain and have this capacity to somehow undermine, silence initiatives whose positive effects we know, but whose positive effects cannot be concretized right now due to this structural situations. I didn't mention the armed groups, of course, but we have people carrying weapons. And when you have a weapon in your hand, of course, it's easier to silence whoever who does not hold a weapon. So I'll stop here professionally before moving to the next questions.
Thank you so much, Yvan, for, of course, also bringing into the picture, as you said, the other elements of power, the top-down, the colonial, and so forth, that should not be neglected in this discussion. So let me now turn to our final speaker, Fatima Alansa. Fatima, I would like to bring in your perspective from Mali. You have worked closely with communities and mediation initiatives across the region. Could you share with us how people actually manage conflict and insecurity in their everyday life? Maybe also the role that women and young people play in those efforts. That would be great. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Veronique. It's a pleasure for me to be speaking at this very important platform and looking at the current situation in the region. I think it's a very important platform right now to share best practices. As a person who has been leading a local, national organization working on peace building for several years now in Mali, I think your question is very important on how community actually manage conflicts in insecurity and in their everyday life, especially when formal systems are absent and mistreated, which is the case in most of the places in most of the communities where we intervene. I will touch three main things, coping mechanism that usually communities do. First of all, is we have noticed that at the community level, a lot of communities sign agreement with armed groups. Some of them sign agreement with the terrorist group in terms of helping them minimize the security situation and also helping them have a free movement within different also, which also allow them to have a kind of economic activities. So for most of those agreements that is signed with the armed groups or the terrorist groups is local authorities usually are aware of it. So they actually do it. That's one thing. And the second thing is in those communities, often insecurity through population movement and returns. Hence, rises family temporarily relocates to safer and social network, host communities and local leaders rather than formal security forces. The return carefully negotiated, sometimes involve informal agreement with armed group like I have mentioned earlier, or even like include the mediation by. And this movement showed that mobility itself is a key local strategy for managing risk, protecting livelihood, and maintaining social cohesion, especially when state or formal system are absent. And the third one is they usually see local authorities and traditional leaders has people that they rely on more than the formal security system that is there for mediation between them and the armed groups, for mediation between them and the terrorist groups. So in terms of the role of women and young people in mediation, in the communities where we intervene, we have noticed that women and young people play actually a key role, especially in mediation and peace building, and often behind the scene because they are overlooked even at the community level. So they usually do it behind the scene. Women contribution include first in the family and community disputes, supporting displaced families. They are usually at the front line, helping those displaced family, even though it's over. They also like play a big role on detecting early sign of tension because most of those women like have a direct relationship with the actors who are usually involved in the conflicts. And young people contribution acting as intermediaries because of the informal network that they have within different involved in conflicts, enforcing communities' agreement through the informal network that they have within, and sometimes we also have seen using cultural practices to promote reconciliation through art, through sports, because those are in those kind of activities. Unfortunately, their contributions are often overlooked by external actors who focus so much, as Dr. Anne says, on formal leaders, formal structure that has been in place, and sometimes underestimate the informal influence of women, youth, and even traditional local leaders. And also sometimes there is a lack of contextualizing the conflicts, trying to bring what has worked in elsewhere to the lack of deep understanding of like the conflict dynamic under the ground. And also since 2012, leaders have strongly mobilized in peace and mediation initiative, like the peace agreement that have been signed with the armed group in 2015, which is no longer in have played a big role, especially at the community level, on mobilizing young people to really act on the implementation of the peace agreement at the local level. Initiate the Cases de la Paix, led by Muna Awa, facilitated local dialogue and strengthening social cohesion, especially northern region of Mali. Like the platform that most people know, the platform of Arab and the Tamashek women to promote reconciliation and peaceful coexistence in conflict-affected areas. NGOs like work, which has been working several years at the community base, at the community level, where we have organized a lot of initiatives. We have organized a lot of community dialogue between civilians and military, between communities. And also we have created a platform where we really try traditional leaders on how to really include more peace building process. And also we have created these communities work also connecting peace building and incoming generative activities so that those communities are resilient economically, so that they are good communities, so that they don't rely on armored, so that they don't easily join the armed groups.
Thank you so much, Fatima, for those thank you for those concrete examples you have given us on how how communities manage conflict, implement peace, but also build social cohesion and resilience, as you said. I'm going to now come back to all of you for a second round, asking you to be brief, because we do want to pick up on the questions coming from the floor. But I think some of the questions we have started to receive are actually going in the direction of what I wanted to ask all of you. So my question would be to ask each of you to reflect briefly on what would we need to change in research or in policy or in practice if international actors were to take those locally rooted peace practices you have described more seriously. I saw one question from the audience asking what would context-sensitive engagement actually look like. So maybe you take one example each. I know there would be so much to say, but you take one example each of what this would look like. And I'm going to reverse the order. So I'm going to start with you, Fatima, if you want.
I don't know if I understand, but because it was kind of cutting. So your question was like, what would be the external actors should do to better engage, right, in a program designing?
Exactly. And if you can give one example of that.
Oh, wow, that's only one. So I think it's very important for communities, internal actors to directly involve in the community affected by conflict. Programs should be designed with the community, by the community, and also led by the communities. And also the external actors also need to have an exit plan with each program that they have designed at the community level, so that the communities are not always dependent on the external actors, so that even though the program is finished, they actually can have what they are doing at the community level. So it should be led and also have an exit plan for a sustainable peace building model.
Excellent. Thank you so much for this concrete example. And I'm turning now to Yvan. What will be your answer, maybe more looking towards the research community, but not necessarily.
But I can also say a few words about some work that I'm doing right now that revolves around the question of dialogue with respect to a very difficult situation that many people are facing right now in the Sahel, which is the situation of a blockade. So some of you may know perhaps that jihadist organizations impose blockades on populations that are not seen as compliant enough. Here we have a sort of very asymmetrical situation, clearly where people have weapons and civilians engage with the jihadist organizations, and it's not so clear whether you should call this proper dialogue or just a coping strategy. So to me, that's a sort of concrete situation that people are facing right now. So I'm not necessarily now thinking of processes of dialogue that could lead to so-called positive peace, more perhaps alleviation of harsh situations for the civilians. And even in these very asymmetrical situations, we do have some possibilities for dialogue. People are not completely deprived of agency and can make sure through specific channels and also through the Islamic idiom, which I think is super important, through the Islamic idiom and the Islamic normative references, they can say, look, what you're doing to us is not the right Islam, right? And if you're a jihadist organization and you are challenged on about Islamic norms that you are imposing on people, then you owe the people a sort of response based on Islamic normative references. And this opens some room for dialogue. So what I'm suggesting here and what I'm talking about right now is not necessarily the kind of dialogue that will lead to eternal peace, but that may still lead to some possibilities for population to be heard and lead to the alleviation of a blockade, and to lifting some of the harshest types of bans that jihadist groups are imposing on population. So it's a nice story in the sense that at the very least, even in very asymmetrical situation, you still have a little bit of room for populations to be heard.
Thank you so much, Yvan. Also, very concrete example on how, at least starting from a coping strategy, successful tactics and approaches, what they could look like. I'm going to turn to Bourema now to also answer this question.
Oui, docteur, merci beaucoup. De mon point de vue,
thank you very much, Doctor. My point of view will be, I think we have to actually observe that Sahel has been a subject of so many research. It has been actually an area where so many research have been conducted. And I think that when we look at the situation, the development of the situation, and the result or the outcomes of those research that have been conducted, we can actually observe the difference that is there, that we can explain, that we can come up with a certain approach. And I think when I spoke, firstly, I talked about normalized approaches, and we have an impression that everything goes through a bureaucracy, that we really don't consider the basic. And we know that solutions are very easy and durable through tools that are local. And I think for us to be important, we have to put together some tools or approaches which are indigenous, and we have to consider local dynamics. That's what I think. That can bring a boost between researchers and results when it comes to the people who are living here in Sahel. Thank you.
Some thoughts around how research could be approached differently to have better results, indeed. And I'm now going back to Antje to give also your response to the question.
Yes, and it's great because we had a lot of the very good responses, very concrete
beaucoup de bonnes réponses, de réponses concrètes. Pour lier à ce que Bourema a dit, c'est fondamental de penser comment est-ce que la connaissance de conflits, il y a des analyses qui sont cadrées par les networks externes et les réseaux externes. Et franchement, avoir cette partie où les communautés doivent questionner ces perspectives qui sont mises en place par les forces externes et voir comment est-ce que ceci peut apporter des changements sur terrain. Et on peut avoir des organisations qui sont localement et internationalement qui travaillent ensemble et là où il y a partage de connaissances, des liens de connaissances. Mais pour ajouter à ce que M. Bourema a dit, il doit y avoir une certaine représentation, on doit avoir une certaine représentativité locale dans ce cadre de recherche et nous devons les impliquer dans nos recherches.
Interviewing a few people, but without really, getting into the deep end of things. And that is maybe the lessons learned on stabilization. So, where we had funding models that are short-term, they're predefined outputs, measurable results. So if this order that we're talking about is really hierarchical, right? These engagements do require time and flexibility and long-term relationships. So, what we said, it's not stabilization, it's about how to navigate that space. Maybe just one short point on what Ivan, I'm just going to abuse that 30 seconds on what Ivan has said in his very good response and commentary on the paper is the question about security. I think that the actors, many actors in Sahel, political authorities have actually understood that security is also a question about how to engage with traditional and local leaders. It's just something that is now restarting, maybe as a result also of the international community retracting. But at the same time, and as he said, dialogue with certain groups might not produce long-term security, but it is certainly an important aspect that a security-only lens is not something that's going to bring sustainable peace in the region. Over to you.
Thank you, Antje. And of course, hearing you say that diplomats should take research more seriously is music to my ear as a researcher myself. Let's hope that those diplomats in the room will be taking that seriously. I would now like to come to the final part of our discussion. So if the colleagues can spotlight all of us, then we can make this more of a conversation between us. And I will pick up on a couple of the questions that we are receiving in the Q&A. And I will bring two kind of questions together. So someone in the audience was asking about, you are all speaking about community-centered conflict resolution mechanisms. So on the one hand, how can we, and we being again researchers, diplomats, policymakers, how can we help to empower, strengthen those mechanisms, but also avoid those mechanisms being captured and co-opted by the elites, which is another comment that we saw in the chat. So we shouldn't be too naive about also those mechanisms and be understanding of also how power works. And we have a really good mix of panelists that are representing both civil society as well as state institutions. So I'd love to hear your diverse responses to that. And feel free to either just unmute yourself, or you can also raise your hand if you prefer. Who would like to start? Fatima.
I guess I can start because I have touched it a little bit in my recommendations. I think in terms of having a community centers approach at the community level, there's a different approach to it. First of all, as I mentioned, communities needs to be in the center when designing the program or when designing any project under the ground. Because I have noticed that there are some organizations, sometimes they just come in and implement project without even doing a baseline studies with communities being involved. And when I say communities, I mean the young, the youth, and the women who are directly impacted by conflicts. Have a focus group, have a talk with them, so make them involved in the design of the project. So then you have a people-centered. And also sometimes, even with those programs starts, when there is a coup d'etat or if there is a political decision that does not align with those external actors, maybe national politics, sometimes they just stopped the project. So sometimes that creates a mistrust between external actors and the community. So sometimes I think community centers project is go beyond external politics influence from my point of view. For instance, today in Mali, there is this 10% that the government is starting to require for all the external actors who want to, or the international organization who wants to work in Mali. So a lot of external actors are saying that, okay, this does not work for us because it goes against our national politics. So some of them might stop the program because of that. So then it's become more of a political decision than a community or people-centered approach. And the third thing is be flexible in program implementation, because sometimes local reality and the situation under the ground often dictate priorities. And I have noticed sometimes partners or external actors implement their own agendas at the communities. And sometimes, so you can plan an activity and there's a terrorist attack or there's a possible terrorist attack, you cannot do it. So you might not follow the agenda that has been imposed by the partner. So sometimes really take into consideration the situation and the need, and let the people at the community level lead it is very important to make it more a community-centered approach.
Thank you, Fatima. Again, great concrete examples. Would one of you like to follow up also on the question of how to avoid elite capture? And maybe if I can add one more twist, then going in looking at the role of the state, because someone is also asking in the chat how maybe in our conversation or in your report, Antje, the state is seen more as a spoiler, that more than as a supportive actor. So how can we also look at both dimensions of the state, maybe like how to avoid state institutions maybe utilizing, capturing those community dynamics, but also what is the positive role that they can play?
Well, maybe if I can come in at this moment, the whole question about
Si vous le permettez.
D'accord. Bourrimé,
Oui,
allez-y. Vous
je
êtes
voudrais en
plus
tout cas
un
donner
expert
ma
que moi.
petite
Voilà.
idée
I
par
wanted
rapport
to
à
give
ça.
my
Je pense que
idea
ça
to
réside
that.
surtout
I think
sur
that comes
la
when
requalification, en fait, le
when
rôle
we requalify
qu'il faut
the
prévoir, en
role,
tout cas,
we have to
des communautés
revise the role
dans, bien
that
sûr,
plays the
la
community,
mise en
you
œuvre
know, and we have
derrière
to know
depuis la conception
how to
des
implement.
initiatives.
In
Je
fact,
pense
we
qu'il faut
have
les
to
considérer
reconsider the
comme étant des
community
actrices et non
when we
pas des
actually
bénéficiaires.
conceive
Et si on devait continuer
our
toujours encore
program.
les considérer
Because
comme
if
des
we have
bénéficiaires, bien
to
entendu, il peut y
consider
avoir
the
en tout cas
communities as the
sur la chaîne,
beneficiaries,
il y a
we'll have a problem
cette vision dominante par rapport
because we'll
au
have the
rôle que les
dominant
communautés
vision
ont à jouer.
when it comes
Voilà
to
ce
the
que je
role of the
voudrais en tout cas
community
augmenter
playing.
en plus de
That
ce
is
que
what
Madame
I wanted
Fatima
to
a dit.
add to what
Merci.
Madam Fatima has said. Thank you.
Okay, and then to add on what Bourima has also said, the whole question of what I said, you know, when I argued about heterarchy, a heterarchy sort of way of looking at things isn't only looking at one community approach, but when you look at the farmer herders or many other social groups that are actually sometimes going beyond the community, it is just to understand also the many overlapping sets of authority. So, and the state is, of course, also a part of that authority. And maybe in the report that didn't come through, I thought it did, but, you know, I think that the spoiler in some parts were often also the external intervenants who came with a good intention, but have created new structures that maybe have disturbed some of the work that was already ongoing. And that goes obviously with, you know, an approach that we all know, that there is money, there's funding, there's, you know, good capacities around, and it creates some sort of a disorder. And the whole question of co-optation is something that's very real in the Sahel region, but we should not also misread it, because sometimes just simply the present and the symbolism of being present in certain meetings doesn't automatically equate co-optation. I think that is something that we should also take into account. But the co-optation that is maybe handled by outside actors, well, you've got those 5 women and the 5 members of civil society and the 5 members from this specific community is also not a way to do it. So that's why we argue for this vision on heterarchy, but Yvonne has surely something to say about this as well.
Thank you so much, Antje. Turning maybe to you, Yvonne, any additions to what you've heard? And also bringing in one more dimension about let's say, interrogating this approach. So, because Antje talked now also about external actors, this approach of stabilization. Someone is asking, is that actually a useful framing? How can we rethink stabilization in a way which is also more transformative, or what can we change in the ways that we intervene? So, yeah, any pre-final thoughts from you, maybe, Eva, on that?
Yes, I find it a super tricky question. Why? Because the moment when you have people from the outside interfering with a dialogue that has started without anyone being involved, you're somehow changing the dynamic and introducing potentially harmful dynamic or trends. I remember after the French intervention in Mali, when it was the early days of the so-called stabilisation complex, everybody was like super optimistic about the capacity of the international community to sort of bring about peace in the region. And there was one example that was taken from what happened in Mali in the 90s, which was the so-called Processus de Bourem or Forum de Bourem, during which local communities met without anyone interfering with their discussions and put an end to communal violence. And the big idea at the time was, can we replicate this idea of like local forums and bring about peace at the local level? And this process was initiated and led to all sorts of very negative results. Why? Because what was initially somehow authentic and driven by indigenous forces ended up being a big machinery and money-making thing, right? And that ruined the whole essence and the efficacy of the original process. And so that's why I think it's asking the question, how can we support dialogue, is in fact very, very difficult and also potentially very, very dangerous. But there's one thing at least that should be avoided, which I think needs to be stressed in the present context of the Sahel. I mean, the context of the Sahel right now is that you have a lot of armed actors. So at the very least, don't criminalize those who want to talk. When you have an armed group landing somewhere and the civilians realizing that now the new bosses in town are this armed group or this militia, and when the population sends people to say, okay, who are you? What do you want from us? Can we sort of start a discussion about how we can continue with our existence without you killing us, etc.? You have the other side that generally considers this dialogue as the beginning of some complicity between the civilians and the armed actors. And this is creating very damaging dynamics when each side considers that the people who talk with the other side just because they want to continue to live their lives are in fact complicit with this other side. And this is something that belligerents right now in the Sahel have not all understood, I think. And that's an important message to push, I think.
Thank you so much, Yvan. If you don't mind, I'm going to consider this your final message because we just have 1 minute to go. So I'm going to offer the other three a chance. If there's one more sentence, anything you want to leave us with at the end of your discussion, reflecting on what you've heard. And maybe I'll go to Burema first.
Merci beaucoup, docteur.
Thank you very much, doctor.
Docteur, je voulais répondre.
Doctor, I wanted to talk about what Ivan has actually spoke about. He's a person I know very well. He said the key word here is trust. If we haven't built trust, between different actors, we will always have those suspicions, those doubts. The solution here is this intervention, whether external or internal, has to be built on trust. That is very important. To finish, what I'll have to say is this. My question is not to say, how will we consolidate the Sahel? For me, it will be to understand how will we recognize those structure of peace that existed before we start building other structures that which will take very long. It will be a project of long terms, yes, and we have to avoid to see or not seeing the strengthening of peace or the consolidation of Sahel as an exclusive question of security. It is not exclusive, no. That's what I wanted to say. I don't want to take much time. We have actually took in account so many points to develop, but the time was not on our side. I really would like to contribute to the vision of Sahel. I think the vision of practical ways or practical approaches.
Went too fast, and many
Bien
questions
sûr.
that were asked have not been answered yet, but this is just the beginning of a conversation. Let me give a chance, one sentence from Antje and then from Fatima, and then we will close the session.
So it has to be a longer sentence, but it will be a sentence. So what Burima said, it is all a matter of trust, and trust means that we have to stay in dialogue. And so the challenge in Sahel, to my point of view, maybe to our point of view, Veronique, is not only to change what we do, but to change how we understand the systems that we are engaging with. And that was the point, from stabilisation to navigation, to respect it and maybe to look at it in a interdisciplinary approach as well, because only then engagement can be really meaningful.
Very good. Thank you so much. Fatima, last word is yours.
Yeah, I think for me it is, I do understand that Sahel is a very complex region to engage in, and my advice is, no matter how hard and how complex it is, I don't think disengagement is the solution. I think I know a lot of people, a lot of external actors have a hard time engaging with the military actors. And I think that it's important to think that each disengagement that we do from our side is impacting more communities. So it causes more harm at the community levels. So it's very important to really think on each decision that we are taking on what would be the impacts at the community level, people who actually are directly impacted by conflicts, because this engagement actually impacts more even those trust building. If you leave and then you have to come back, how can you actually rebuild that trust? So stay dialoguing with, no matter who is in power, dialoguing with them on how to find the best way to keep the work going at the community level is the best way to go about it.
Wonderful. This is a very nice closing word. So I'm hoping that on a very modest level with this conversation, we are helping to re-engage or to engage in a meaningful way. Thank you so much to our four speakers. We have now reached the end of our time together, unfortunately. But thank you so much for this very rich and thought-provoking discussion, and to everyone who joined today. I would like to say that this webinar is going to be recorded and will be available on our website very soon. And we invite all of you to continue reading and engaging with the report and the article that we have discussed today, that has also been linked in the chat, hopefully. So yes, look forward to many more conversations. Thank you to everyone, and have a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.